This is the eHealth Radio Network, your source for health advice on demand. And now your host, Eric Michaels.
This is Eric Michaels, and once again, you have tuned into the eHealth Radio Network and the Health News and Technology channels. You can find us and subscribe to our programming on iTunes and can now be heard on TuneIn Radio as well for your convenience. Today we are speaking with Wayne Maddever, CEO of ChroMedX, a medical technology company focused on the development of novel medical devices for in vitro diagnostics and point-of-care testing. Wayne, good morning and welcome to eHealth Radio.
Well, good morning. Thank you for having me.
And you're more than welcome, and thanks for coming out today. So first of all, for starters, what is point-of-care testing, or POCT, and describe key differences between the ones listeners are familiar with to the ones being worked on by your company?
Well, point-of-care testing is any testing that occurs right at the patient's side, at bedside, in the home, in a nursing home, by first responders, whatever. But the key here is that rather than being tests being done in a central laboratory in a hospital, the tests are done right at the side of the patient. And I guess the most common thing that people would have heard of would be diabetes testing, glucose testing for diabetes. And in that case, the patient monitors their own glucose levels. Our device that we're working on, the Hemopalm, as it's called, is a little bit different in that it is a clinical device. And by that I mean it analyzes things that a physician would need to know as opposed to the patient themselves. What we are actually, and more specifically working on, is blood analysis. And so there's a number of aspects of blood analysis that we will be measuring. We are duplicating the measurement techniques that take place in a central lab, but we're putting that into a handheld device. And why is that important? It means that these important characteristics of the blood, which I'll describe in a moment, are known, are tested right at the patient's side, and this has particular importance in the case of first responders, Doctors Without Borders, disaster relief, military, things like that. In some cases, either the central laboratory is too far away or it simply doesn't exist. So most specifically, what we are testing is, first of all, something called co-oximetry. And co-oximetry is a measurement of the various states of hemoglobin in your blood. Of course, the hemoglobin is what carries the oxygen to the cells. And there are a number of different states of hemoglobin, oxyhemoglobin when it's fully oxygenated after it comes out of your lungs, and deoxy after it's given up its oxygen to the cells. But in the case of first responders, some of the other ones that are important are ones called carboxyhemoglobin. And to give a good example of this would be carbon monoxide poisoning in the case of a fire victim. And very important that that information be gathered as quickly as possible. That could be transmitted ahead to the hospital, and that means that when the patient arrives at the hospital, you know exactly what kind of state they're in. Do they need simply an oxygen mask, or do they need a hyperbaric chamber? Typically what would happen now is that type of patient would come into the hospital. One would have to wait for a sample to be taken and sent to the central lab. And what's also important about this is these samples that we're talking about, these aren't the normal samples we all get when we go to the doctor and get that little evacuated tube that takes a sample out of the vein in your arm. Those are venous samples. For the sorts of analysis we're doing, one needs to take an arterial sample as it come out of your artery, and that means it's taken by either a physician or a specially trained technician. So it's painful, it's dangerous, and it's time-consuming because you have to have the physician there to take that sample. We're going to have the option of doing it through a finger prick. And the things that we're going to measure, I mentioned co-oximetry. We're also going to measure blood gas, which is pH, partial pressure of oxygen in your blood, PO2 that's called, PCO2, which is partial pressure of CO2 in your blood, and then electrolytes, sodium, potassium, and chloride. All those things can be measured with a finger prick. And while that is not the current standard of care, the world is moving to point-of-care testing, and we believe that it will be, but certainly it gives accurate information in an advanced form by first responders, so that information can be readily available to the hospital before the patient gets there, or even in the case of when one arrives at the hospital, one can do a triage in the emergency room and provide that information again without waiting for the physician to take that arterial sample.
Absolutely phenomenal. Now, how are blood gas analyzers testing currently perform right now. Can you see this process vastly improved today?
Well, what happens is they're done on a very large central benchtop machine, and it's really a matter of timing. We're taking exactly the same measurement techniques. They use two different techniques to measure these various factors. One is spectroscopy, or measurement through light, and the other is a measurement through sensors. The best thing I can provide for your listeners is if one thinks about their high school chemistry and the pH meter that they had in chemistry class, that sensor, that's a sensor. That's the sort of thing we're doing, and we're miniaturizing. In the lab, those are done in a central machine, in a large benchtop machine. All those aspects I've described, the co-oximetry, the blood gases, and the electrolytes are all measured by those devices. So we're taking exactly the same measurement techniques and miniaturizing it. We have a microspectrometer in our device, and we have a biosensor array and a series of disposable cartridges that take the sample and are slid into the analyzer, the handheld analyzer, to provide the results.
What is the hemopalm, and how does this technology work?
Well, the hemopalm is the entire system. It's the handheld analyzer plus a suite of handheld cartridges. And again, those cartridges can take a sample through a finger prick, or they can use a syringe. If we're in an operating room or someplace where there is a syringe, arterial syringe sample available, that can be used as well. And the sequence of events is the sample is taken from the patient, the cartridge is slid into the analyzer goes through its process, and pops out the results for the physician.
Today we are joined by Wayne Maddever, CEO of ChroMedX, a medical technology company focused on the development of novel medical devices for in vitro diagnostics and point-of-care testing, here on eHealth Radio's Health News and Technology channels, a part of the eHealth Radio Network. Wayne, what are the ideal settings for the hemopalm? Where is it needed the most?
Well, I think where it really brings a breakthrough is in first responders, places where there's no lab available or not close by. So we could talk about paramedics getting information to the hospital earlier. Remember that physicians are always driven by patient care, and patient care means more information faster. So we can talk about first responders, we can talk about disaster relief, military, Doctors Without Borders, places where there's simply no labs available. We could also use this device. Other applications would be in the hospital, where more immediate results are available in emergency room triage. In the operating room, where one can get immediate results, for example, in cardiac surgery, measuring the hemoglobin content, things like that. Other applications might be nursing homes, respiratory care, measuring the oxygen content of the blood. How is that patient that may be on oxygen in a nursing home? What is their status? What is their real status? Getting a very accurate measurement there without having to send that patient to the hospital, have an arterial sample drawn and make those measurements. So the whole idea is point of care. Let's do it right where the patient is. Let's get the information as quickly as possible and get it back to the physician so they can make decisions in terms of the patient care.
How do you see your test empowering doctors and first responders who do not have access to a lab, and where do you see it saving lives?
Well, time is an important element in many of these cases. By having this information sooner, it means that in a case of a first responder, a paramedic, that information is readily available. Treatment can begin immediately when the patient arrives at the hospital. In the case of other first responders like military or disaster relief, well, the information's not available because there's no lab. And so here you've got a clinical device that can provide information to the physician and let them know if there's a critical condition that needs to be treated, which might not be seen, depending on the situation, might not be obvious without this type of test.
And when can we expect to use this technology?
Well, we're currently developing the prototypes. We're well on our path in the various aspects of our development. We would expect our alpha prototype, let's call it a benchtop prototype, to be completed the end of this year, early next quarter. We would then move to a beta prototype and on to clinical testing and FDA approval. I'd emphasize at this point that FDA approval for devices like this is really a measure of the device's performance against a predicate device, in other words, one that has already been approved. This is very unlike the FDA approval for drugs where we have these phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 tests. The clinical data is somewhat limited. It's simply a matter of taking the sample, splitting it between a predicate device and our device, and statistically looking at the results. So we would expect that this device will be available on the market probably in early 2017. So we need sort of next year to get through that prototype clinical, do the FDA submission, and we're hoping that in 2017 we'll have the device on the market.
Awesome news. Certainly have been grateful to have you today and to find out more about ChroMedX and what is going on in the market there and when this will be available. Where can our listeners get more information on ChroMedX?
Well, we'd welcome you to visit our website, which is www.ChroMedX.com.
Easy enough. Well, Wayne, thanks so much for your time today, and thanks for joining us here today on eHealth Radio.
Thank you, Eric. It's very much appreciated.
And the pleasure was certainly ours. We've been speaking with Wayne Maddever, CEO of ChroMedX, a medical technology company focused on the development of novel medical devices for in vitro diagnostics and point-of-care testing. And once again, the website for more information is ChroMedX.com. And this has been Eric Michaels, and you've been listening to eHealth Radio and the Health News and Technology channels, a part of the eHealth Radio Network. And we do thank you for listening. And until next time, enjoy.
Thanks for tuning in to the eHealth Radio Network. For more information or to subscribe to this podcast, visit eHealthRadioNetwork.com.